It is 5 hours Universal Time. Stay tuned for Daybreak Africa, coming up after these latest world news headlines.
I'm Victor Beatty reporting. Desperately needed humanitarian aid arrives in Syrian towns. An agreement between the Syrian government and opposition forces has allowed dozens of trucks to deliver food, medicine, and blankets to at least 3 besieged towns. Some accounts report dozens have died of starvation. The humanitarian effort by UN and other relief organizations represents the first supplies these towns have had for months. They refer to Medea, close to the Lebanese border, Foua, and Khmer in Idlib province. Abdulaziz El-Mashi, co-founder of the Syrian Solidarity Movement, blames the regime of Bashar al-Assad for the widespread suffering.
Assad has been using food as a weapon for almost 3 years. So basically, when Assad failed to break into the opposition-held areas by force, he used like all kinds of weapons he has got, including chemical weapons, and then he started using food as a weapon.
But Syria's UN ambassador Bashar Jafri said his government is cooperating with the aid delivery and blamed what he called armed terror groups for the humanitarian disaster.
The reality of the so-called besieged, hard-to-reach areas is that some of those areas are controlled by terrorist groups who are using civilians as human shields, and other areas are besieged from the terrorist groups who are preventing the delivery of a humanitarian assistance.
In Foua and Khafraya, the rebels have been responsible for sieges that left people there in need of urgent help. In Niger, a leading opposition figure, Hama Amadou, jailed for his alleged role in a baby trafficking scandal, has been denied bail. He denies the charge. An appeals court upheld the decision of another court last month. The former parliamentary speaker should not be granted conditional release. The decision precedes next month's elections. This is VOA News. The Islamic State has claimed responsibility for 4 separate suicide attacks in Iraq Monday that killed at least 32 people. Gunmen sprayed bullets at shoppers before blowing themselves up inside a Baghdad shopping mall. A car bomb exploded on a Baghdad street not far from the shopping district. 2 other bombs blew up outside a cafe in the town of Mudadia, northeast of Baghdad. U.S. defense officials Monday said a U.S. airstrike hit a cash storage building in Mosul, Iraq, sending millions of dollars of IS money up in smoke. A Pentagon official said the cash came from illicit activity, including oil sales, looting, and extortion. The chair of the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission for South Sudan has criticized the government's decision to more than double the number of states in the war-weary country from 10 to 28. Former Botswanan President Festus Mogae called it a breach of August's peace agreement.
The creation of the 28 states has been a complicating factor. So all the other parties other than the government are up in arms against it. And we're going to have to discuss it in the next meeting.
Last month, President Salva Kiir dissolved the regional states, a move opposed by rebels led by Riek Machar, who says he wasn't consulted. The U.S. repatriated a Saudi man from the Guantanamo U.S. military prison in Cuba. The Defense Department Monday announced that it released Mohammed Abd el-Rahman On al-Shamrani to his home country. President Obama, in the last year of his presidency, has pledged to close the Cuba facility, used to house terror suspects for 14 years. His spokesman, Josh Earnest, was asked about it again Monday.
This chipping away at the population that included the announcement from the Department of Defense just this morning that an additional Gitmo detainee had been transferred to Saudi Arabia, certainly is what we can do right now. And we have made some progress in reducing the population at the prison at Guantanamo Bay. But ultimately, to accomplish the goal of closing it, we're going to need Congress to remove some obstacles that have prevented it thus far.
There remain 103 detainees from a publicly acknowledged peak of nearly 800. Hundreds have been repatriated or transferred to third-party countries. South African Paralympian Oscar Pistorius has appealed to the country's constitutional court in a last-ditch effort to overturn his murder conviction for killing his girlfriend in 2013. He has been on bail, awaiting a new sentence since early last month when judges found him guilty of murder, overturning his earlier conviction on the lesser charge of manslaughter for shooting dead Reva Steenkamp. The Taliban has freed a Canadian it held hostage in Afghanistan for at least 5 years. Colin Rutherford went to the country in 2010. The Taliban released a video of him in captivity in 2011. The insurgent group accused him of spying. In the video, Rutherford insisted he was a tourist. I'm Victor Beatty, VOA News.
That's the latest world news from VOA.
Good morning, Africa. Welcome to Daybreak Africa from the Voice of America. I'm James Barter in Washington. Today is Tuesday, January 12th, and here are some of the stories we are covering. The Sierra Leone's government ordered the importation of waste into the country.
Whatever I did in good faith to protect the country from any difficulty that has to do with the toxic waste. What allowed us to encourage them was the fact that they wanted to build this plant to manufacture fertilizer in a country where there is no fertilizer.
Ibrahim Ben Cabo is Senior Special Advisor to President Ernest Bai Koroma of Sierra Leone. South Sudan President welcomes the reunification of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement. The DRC government is taking rape allegations against its troops seriously, and Uganda's government denies intimidating the media ahead of the February election.
There is a freedom of speech in Uganda, and it is the strength of the NRM government. We've got over 268 private radio stations. How can we control all of them?
That's retired Major General Jim Muhwezi, Uganda's Minister of Information. Zimbabwe discussed U.S. policies in expectation of a new U.S. ambassador, and the World Anti-Doping Agency says Kenya made progress, but more work needs to be done. Those stories plus Mark Oldman Sports and our listener of the day are coming up on Daybreak Africa. The Sierra Leone government has distanced itself from a letter supposedly written by a senior advisor to President Ernest Bai Koroma granting permission to the Dutch Chamber of Commerce for the importation of non-hazardous municipal waste into Sierra Leone. The government said in a statement it did not authorize any official of government to approve such a deal. The letter was signed by Ibrahim Ben Cabo, Senior Special Advisor to President Koroma. Mr. Cabo was questioned on Monday by the country's Criminal Investigation Department about the waste transfer. Cabo tells me his letter to the Dutch Chamber of Commerce made clear that the waste material should be for the development of fertilizer for agriculture purposes and that it should not be toxic.
I gave that advisory letter to the agent of a Dutch farm in Lebanon who said he wanted to come and set up a plant here to manufacture fertilizer. What I did inform him in that letter that if he wanted to go through the process of investing in this country, he should be very certain that even if he's utilizing domestic waste, it should be toxic-free. We also advise him that anything that has to do with the lives of the people should be treated as paramount, because we do not want to be dragged into this embarrassment of toxic waste. But we also did say in the letter that no decision will be clear if it did not have the approval of the President of the Republic of Sierra Leone.
So you went before the CID, the police intelligence. What did they ask you to come there?
The simple thing is that they wanted to know whether, in fact, that letter came from my office. And I did say, yes, it came from my office. But, of course, they could not see much damage in it or any illegal element in it. So I was released. But the important thing is that whatever I did in good faith to protect the country from any difficulty that has to do with the toxic waste. What allowed us to encourage them was the fact that they wanted to build this plant to manufacture fertilizer in a country where there is no fertilizer. Nobody got himself involved in any illegal matter. What I did was to give advice to people who wanted to invest in this country, to tell them that they could not do A, B, C, D, and they should do A, B, C, D to make sure that they work within the realm of the government structure.
Mr. Cabo, even if the waste was not hazardous, the ordinary Sierra Leonean would say, why would our government, knowing full well what we just came from, Ebola, why would you want to even accept any waste from any country?
Well, I think that the waste came in as a secondary matter. The primary matter was the whole installation of the plant for fertilizer using domestic waste here. But the reason for the external waste came only because we needed to caution them that in future you want to use anything outside Sierra Leone, it must not be of any toxic nature. To us, that was the point we wanted to emphasize. And we also said that you must go through the technical people to make sure that whatever you are bringing here is within the laws. And we also emphasize the fact that the president must give the final say in matters of this nature. To us, it's important that we get this clear.
Ibrahim Ben Carbo is the senior special advisor to President Ernest Bai Koroma of Sierra Leone. He was speaking with me from the capital, Freetown. A Ugandan government official says a report by the U.S.-based Human Rights Watch accusing the government of intimidating the local media ahead of February's presidential and parliamentary election is nothing but propaganda. Retired Major General Jim Muhwezi, Minister of Information and National Guidance, says freedom of speech in Uganda is the strength of the ruling National Resistance Movement government. In a report released Monday, Human Rights Watch says journalists have been suspended under government pressure and radio stations threatened for hosting opposition members as guests or when panelists expressed views critical of the ruling party. Muhwezi said the report is laying the groundwork for an after-election complaint because President Museveni is drawing large crowds and will win the election.
There is a freedom of speech in Uganda, and it is the strength of the NRM government. We've got over 268 private radio stations. How can we control all of them? There is no intimidation. There is freedom of speech. There is freedom of the media in Uganda without any threat from the government.
Mr. Minister, there's a quote here by one of the authors of the report from Human Rights Watch. It said journalists have been suspended under government pressure and radio stations threatened for hosting opposition members as guests or when panelists express views critical of the ruling party.
I am not aware of any incident of that nature. Does the reporter give any evidence? Does he mention any name of any journalist that has been threatened or any radio station that has been closed or threatened?
Mr. Minister, with all due respect, the Honorable Mbabazi, a presidential candidate, just about a week or two ago said that a radio station where he was supposed to appear on a talk show, he was denying that privilege, and that station was closed down.
No, which station? Did he mention it? Honorable Mbabazi owns a radio station which I can tune in anytime now, and it is talking ear of government all the time, and it's running and open. It's not closed. His own station, which does not talk anything good about government. It's running here.
So there's no media self-censorship in Uganda because of the actions of your government?
Absolutely not. It is definitely propaganda which should be dismissed with the contempt it deserves.
It says here that freedom of expression and association are also under threat in your country.
Absolutely not. That is very, very wrong. There is freedom in Uganda, and it is one of the strengths of our government.
Where, Mr. Minister, you think that this is coming? Because according to the report, 170 people were interviewed, Ugandans.
Well, I think this is just malicious. It's because they see the way the elections are going. Our presidential candidate is pulling massive rallies and so on. I suspect that they are beginning to prepare the ground for their complaints.
Retired Major General Jim Muhwezi is Uganda's Minister of Information and National Guidance. He was speaking with me from the capital, Kampala. A Democratic Republic of Congo official says the country is taking seriously allegations that several of its soldiers deployed as peacekeepers in the Central African Republic committed rape. The United Nations says the DRC battalion in the Central African Republic will be withdrawn and not replaced. Nick Long files this report from Goma in eastern Congo.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has a battalion of about 800 soldiers and 123 police officers with the UN mission in the Central African Republic, known as MINUSCA. Last August, 3 soldiers in that battalion were accused of raping 3 female civilians, including 1 minor. The DRC Justice Minister said at the time the allegations would be investigated. This month, the UN said it is investigating new allegations of sexual abuse of minors by peacekeepers. It is not clear how important the rape allegations are in the UN decision the DRC troops should withdraw from the Central African Republic. UN officials have said the troops failed an internal assessment based on equipment, vetting procedures and preparedness. But in an interview with VOA, the DRC president's personal representative charged with the fight against sexual violence, Janine Mabunda Lioko Mudiai, linked the decision to the allegations. Mabunda says the DRC was informed by the United Nations that a decision had been taken on the withdrawal of the DRC contingent from MINUSCA following rape allegations against certain soldiers in that unit. She says the DRC has taken strong measures in recent months in response to those allegations. She says the DRC brought 20 soldiers back to Kinshasa. Their cases are being examined and the 20 are at the Ndolo military prison, she says, adding that this shows how seriously the DRC regards questions of violence against women, particularly where security forces are concerned. VOA asked what stage has been reached in the inquiry into the rape allegations. Mabunda says the process is ongoing and must go through stages. We must not put on a show trial, she says. The rights of defendants must not be trampled on, although certainly these are atrocious, ignoble charges. The DRC's justice system can be trusted, Mabunda insists. Since her bureau was created 18 months ago, she says, the DRC's institutions have shown they are capable of striking hard when rape cases are brought before them and when those cases are proved. A number of DRC soldiers have been convicted of sexual offences in the past 18 months, including a general and a colonel. Nick Long for VOA News, Goma.
Today's Tuesday, January 12th, and you're listening to Daybreak Africa on the Voice of America. I'm James Butte in Washington. Daybreak Africa time is now 17 minutes past the hour. Relations between the United States and Zimbabwe have been frosty for some years, and many often look to the choice of ambassador to gauge any shift in policy or relations. Irvin Chifara reports on Zimbabweans' expectations of new U.S. ambassador-designate Harry Thomas Jr.
U.S. foreign policy is determined by Congress, the White House, and relevant legislation, and no fundamental political and economic changes have taken place since President Robert Mugabe won the presidential poll in 2013 at the heart of a standoff with Washington over human rights violations, bad economic policies, and alleged electoral fraud. Most Zimbabweans believe that Ambassador-designate Mr. Thomas Jr. is widely expected to continue with the same U.S. policies that were being implemented by outgoing Ambassador Mr. Bruce Watton. The Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act of 2001, or ZIDERA, which enforces targeted sanctions imposed on President Robert Mugabe and his inner circle, is still intact with no indications that it will be repealed anytime soon. America has over the years accused President Mugabe and his colleagues of serious human rights violations and electoral fraud. Mr. Mugabe has dismissed the sanctions, saying they were imposed in retaliation to the government's moves to forcibly take over fertile land from white commercial farmers. More than 3,000 white commercial farmers have been displaced from their land following the introduction of the land reforms in 2000. Economic commentator Masimbai Manyanya said Mr. Thomas Jr. will no doubt continue with America's policy of rectifying many faults in governance issues and ensuring the creation of a democratic state in Zimbabwe.
The new ambassador will obviously carry on with the agenda that has been set by his predecessors. And there's no other way of looking at the agenda except in terms of what American foreign policy clearly says, to pursue democratization and to ensure that there's transparency in governance systems and to ensure that there's protection of the law, the rule of the law, and that people participate in governance.
Harare resident Jeffrey Moyo agrees with Manyanya, saying there is no way Washington can have a policy shift given the current social, economic, and political situation in Zimbabwe.
The incoming of the new U.S. ambassador won't change anything in Zimbabwe. Their position has always been the same. they seem to be indirectly maintaining the sanctions.
ZANU-PF spokesman Simon Kayamoyo could not be reached for comment. Another ZANU-PF activist, Spencer Rakabopa, concurs, adding the new ambassador was coming to defend American sanctions against Zimbabwe.
To me, it doesn't mean anything, and nothing is going to change. We know that America will just maintain its stance even on sanctions.
When Mr. Thomas Jr. was appointed a month ago, he noted that America would always attempt to open dialogue with Zimbabwe. Indications are that he will push for the full implementation of the 2013 constitution, credible, lasting democratic reforms, and respect for human rights and rule of law by the government of Zimbabwe. Reporting from Harare, this is Ivan Chifera.
South Sudan President Salva Kiir says the reunification of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement Party is complete and that there won't be any more factions after last week's convention incorporated the Arusha Reunification Agreement into the party's constitution. Philipton Aller reports from Juba.
Speaking at the close of the SPLM convention, President Kiir said the party's reunification has given him new energy to lead the party and the country.
Yesterday when we were here, some members were questioning why this new Arusha agreement was being incorporated into our constitution. And that was not an easy question. But here it has been done. That we said, no, this was the source of our reunification.
Mr. Kiir says incorporating the Arusha agreement into the SPLM constitution marks the end of a operationalized SPLM. The SPLM convention also passed the party manifesto, a new party flag, and endorsed red as the SPLM color. President Kiir says the unity shown at the convention by party delegates gives him confidence that he enjoys the support of all members.
These 5 outcomes of this extraordinary convention have given me new energy, inspiration, and dedication to serve our people with the knowledge that I have a solid support from you.
SPLM in opposition lead negotiator Taban Dengai says more must be done before the SPLM is formally reunited. Speaking to reporters after the closing session, he said the SPLM in opposition did not take part in the extraordinary convention.
We did not participate in passing this constitution, so we don't know what it is there. They have told us that they have incorporated a Arusha agreement in totality. We are not sure of this. We shall take the constitution that they have passed, we go and study it, and then we shall communicate with them, because to us, the process is not yet completed.
Guy says the convention should have been delayed until SPLM in opposition leader Riek Machar arrives in Juba so he could have participated in the meeting. SPLM officials in Juba say registration for political parties expires this week as stipulated by the 2012 Political Parties Act, so therefore it was necessary to meet last week. The Arusha SPLM reunification agreement also states that there will be secret voting as opposed to a show of hands during SPLM elections, and President Kiir will no longer appoint 5% of the delegates. For VOA News, I am Philip Tonaleu in Juba.
As the birthplace and training ground of many of the world's finest middle and long-distance runners, Kenya has recently been shaken by news that several of its athletes failed drug tests, leading to their suspension. As Joel Craig reports from Nairobi, there are accusations Kenya's Athletics Federation is not doing enough to tackle doping or graft.
A country known for producing some of the world's premier distance runners has recently found itself in the spotlight for the use of illegal performance-enhancing drugs. The International Association of Athletics Federations announced in November it has been investigating Kenya since March for allegations of covering up doping. 24-year-old Samuel Juguna is a Kenyan pole vaulter and marathoner. He says it is not good that some of his fellow athletes have been involved in the scandal.
Maybe we may come number one, but it's not a perfect. It's not fair to others because can you imagine I'm working hard to work on that and someone is using drugs? It's discouraging.
Kenya banned 7 athletes in November for doping offenses. raising the number of drug cases to 40 in the past 3 years. This includes 2 female sprinters sent home from the recent World Championships in Beijing. Retired General Jackson Tuwei is the acting president of Athletics Kenya, the country's national association. He says in all local and international competitions, athletes are tested for doping in what he calls a very elaborate exercise. Tuwei is acting president of Athletics Kenya because the IAAF provisionally suspended 3 senior Kenyan athletics officials for 180 days. The officials are accused of subverting the anti-doping control process in Kenya and the improper diversion of funds received from Nike through a sponsorship deal. Juguna says these allegations tarnish Kenya's athletic reputation.
Which also diminishes on our country, and our country is the first from the world with athletics. And it's not good because it also has some not good image.
The International Olympic Committee asked Kenya's Olympic Committee, as well as the World Anti-Doping Agency, to ensure an efficient out-of-competition testing program for athletes in all sports. In November, the Kenyan government set up a national anti-doping organization and gave it the authority to carry out tests and prosecute cases. Tuwei says Athletics Kenya does not have the power or capacity to investigate or prosecute, so he is pleased the government set up this new agency. Jill Craig, VOA News, Nairobi.
Time for Daybreak Africa Sports. Here is Mark Owoma in Johannesburg, South Africa. Very good Tuesday morning to you, Mark.
Good morning, James. In our Daybreak Africa Sports News, we begin with athletics. Timothy Ayeko led Timothy Toroitich and Moses Kibet in a 1-2-3 Ugandan sweep in the men's race at the Zornota International Cross Country Meet in Amorebieta, Spain on Sunday, while Kenyan Mercy Cherono prevailed in the women's race. In football, a first-half strike by midfielder Ifeanyi Matthews handed Nigeria a 1-0 victory over Ivory Coast in the South African capital Tshwane on Monday. Both teams are set for the African Nations Championship CHAN starting in Kigali, Rwanda on Saturday. Meanwhile, Ivory Coast coach Michel Duseya says they'll face CHAN hosts Rwanda with determination on Saturday. He concedes his side had a poor first half against Nigeria.
Had a poor first half and we conceded 4 opportunities before the goal, and it was logical that the Nigeria lead at the halftime. At second halftime we tried to push on the end of the game to be back on the score, but we failed. It's a friendly game, but it was an important game because of confidence before the first game against Rwanda. We know it will be a tough game. So,
like you said, you are playing the first match against the home side. Do you feel that your team is ready for the action?
We know that we are able to do well. We proved it because we took over Ghana during the early minute for qualifying here, so we know we can do well. It's a tough group because of the home team and because of Morocco and Gabon, which has good sides too, so we know it's a tough group, but we will have to fight against Rwanda, against its crowd. I hope we don't have to fight against refereeing.
That was Michel Duseya, the Ivory Coast coach, speaking in Tshwane, South Africa. Still in Tshwane, Nigeria coach Sunday Olise is pleased that his injured strikers have recovered in time for action in Rwanda. He's satisfied with the team's performance against the Ivory Coast.
But I think the boys are in top spirit and physically also solid team. And the Ivory Coast Nigeria rivalry is always there, and they really give us a good fight. Because my boys didn't let them play. But what the good thing is that even though we won 1-0, we created lots of scoring chance. Let's just hope that Rwanda will tap them in.
You said earlier that some of your players had taken knocks. What's the condition now? Have they recovered?
Yeah, like you saw the 2 strikers they played today, and the third one was who was the third one again? Yeah, it was Akas, the captain, yes. And they played 90 minutes.
That was Sunday Olise, Nigeria Super Eagles coach, speaking in Tshwane, South Africa. And that's it for Daybreak Africa Sports News. I'm Mark Owoma in Johannesburg, South Africa. Back to you, James, in Washington.
Thank you, Mark. Have a good day. Briefly, before we leave you, a summary of Africa news. South African Paralympic champion Oscar Pistorius has appealed to the country's constitutional court in a last-ditch attempt to overturn his murder conviction for killing his girlfriend in 2013. That is it for this Tuesday, January 12th edition of Daybreak Africa. On behalf of the Daybreak Africa crew, producer Nicole Beckford, reporters Peter Clotti and Ricky Stryak, as well as sports editor Mark Oman, along with our engineer Charles Hall. I'm James Barton in Washington, wishing all of you in Africa a very good day.
Savor the flavor of African music. Hi, I'm Heather Maxwell, host of Music Time in Africa. Tune in, feast your ears, and dig into an hour of amazing Pan-African music, featured interviews, and music news. Music Time in Africa, Saturday and Sunday at 1500 and 2000 UTC.
Next on Reporters Roundtable. Join me, Douglas Impuga, on Reporters Roundtable. I'll have African journalists and expert guests take a look at upcoming elections in Africa in the year 2016. So please join us on Thursday at 17:30 UTC right here on VOA Africa.